Number 10. Hepzibah. Despite not being a mutant, Hepzibah became a member of the mainly mutant team of the X-Men after leaving the Starjammers. Initially, she was Corsair's lover, but after being forced to part ways with the Starjammers, she would end up on Earth and join the X-Men team. Hepzibah's abilities come from her own skill set and from her alien physiology. Hepzibah is a Mephistoid, the member of an anthropomorphic skunk-like alien race. After the loss of Corsair, Hepzibah would end up becoming closer to fellow X-Men member Warpath, and would even become his lover as well in the comics. It's fine, Corsair was dead at the time. While Hepzibah was a member of the X-Men and even was recruited for a time to be on X-Force, she eventually would return to the Starjammers once her lover, Corsair, also Cyclops' Havoc's and Vulcan's father, had returned from the dead. Number 9. Egg. While Fabio Medina might be more easily recognized now that he is part of the all-important mutant team known as the Five, responsible for resurrecting fallen mutants, when he was known by his former codename of Goldballs, he would have been much less recognizable. Also, if you haven't been reading the comics for a while, you might not know that he's important now. That sounds so mean. He was important before, but he's really important now, you know what I mean? Fabio's power allows him to produce and shoot, well, gold balls from his body, each one firing off with a poink sound. However, since his time as Gold Balls, it was more recently revealed during the Dawn of X that the balls he was producing were in actuality unfertile eggs. With this revelation, he took up the name Egg and became part of the 5 most important mutants on the island nation of Krakoa. As with this newly understood power, he could create eggs which could then be made fertile and used to regrow and resurrect fallen mutants. So, if you haven't heard of Egg or Gold Balls, he's a member you'll likely be more interested in knowing now. And before we move on to our next spot, just a quick reminder, if you love mutants as much as I love mutants, and I love them a lot, be sure you show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Beak. Beak's mutation ended up being slightly more unfortunate in comparison to some of the other, more well-known core members of the X-Men team. Beak is Barnal Bohusk, and his mutant powers are simply that he looks and shares similar attributes to a bird. His bones are hollow and light, meant to lend well to flying, and he has feathers which should also allow him or help him to fly, and yet he's not really a good flyer, which is kind of sad. In fact, initially Beak couldn't really fly at all when he first appeared. Now he can, but he still has to work really hard to do so, and even then he can really only fly for short distances. Other than that, Beak simply can see better than most at long range and is armed with talons and a beak, which he can obviously use to fight. But for the most part, Beak simply looks like a bird, and as such is usually more on the sidelines than in the middle of the action. He did for a while have a suit, however, that enhanced his abilities and also granted him additional strength and powers, more useful for physical fighting. Number 7. Morph. Because there are multiple morphs out there, not everyone is as familiar with Benjamin Deeds as the morph who appeared in the animated X-Men series from the 90s. This version of Morph, however, is a lot less cocky in comparison to that animated series version. Benjamin Deeds is a mutant who, like the animated version, can transform into anyone else. However, his powers are a little more unique than most shapeshifters. The more time he spends with someone, the more his appearance will grow to mimic theirs, not really becoming an exact duplicate of them, but more becoming his own version of that person, which also affects how that person sees him. Using his powers also makes the person he resembles both more eager to like and to trust Morph. And actually, initially I believe Morph didn't even like that codename. They were like, you should be Morph, and he was like, meh, nah.
Number 6. Toad. When you think of the name Toad in relation to a superhero, you're gonna picture something pretty silly in your head. And Mortimer Toynbee isn't that far off from what you'd think. He made his first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 4. So he hops around, which seems silly, but his legs are so strong that he can leg press 3 tons. And it's not just his legs that are strong, his upper half possesses superhuman strength as well. His arms can lift about 1 ton. He also has flexible bone structure, regenerative healing factor, infrared vision, and the best part, his 30-foot long tongue can also act as a whip. And it can secrete venom that can give him mind control over your body, and his saliva is acid as well. Number 5. Wither. Making his first appearance in New Mutants Volume 2, Issue 3, Kevin Ford grew up thinking that he was cursed, or he was the most unlucky person ever, one or the two. See, his mutant power started manifesting, and then he noticed it first in his plants, and then he noticed it in his clothes, and then he noticed it in people. So what would happen is his plants would wither. They would wither and they would die. And then his clothes were starting to decay as well. So once his father figures out this mutation, he tries to calm him down, but coming into contact with him, obviously the inevitable happens. He sees the world in this lifeless or decaying way now. See, it's part of this mutation. He can disintegrate all forms of organic matter just by one touch. Whatever he touches withers, so now we get his name. It turns into dust within seconds, whatever it is. Now this seems boring, I guess. When you think of it in like a cinematic battle, it's not too exciting. But this guy can take out an entire elite squad just by touching them. I mean, realistically, just send him in always. No one's gonna expect it. All you have to do is get him to fist bump everybody and then bam, just like that. No more bad guys. Number 4. Nocturne. This next one, she comes from Earth 2182, where she's the daughter of Nightcrawler and Scarlet Witch. Now, she's got her dad's looks, unfortunately. She's blue, furry, she's got 3 fingers and 3 toes. She's got a tail and yellow eyes and pointed ears. Now, sure, she looks like she can take out any bad guy, like she looks like an alien. So she possesses the powers of both of her parents. She can blast off energy bolts, she can climb walls, but what makes her even more powerful is that she has the ability to possess others for 12 hours, or 1 lunar cycle. But once that timer is up, the victim is just completely out of it for 24 hours, just comatose. This super offspring packs a super punch, that's for sure. Number 3, Tattoo. Christine Cord made her comic book debut in the new X-Men issue 126. She was a student of the Xavier Institute, and she's known as Tattoo, well, because her mutation allows her to display messages or designs on her skin, and she can phase through matter, which is also kind of fun. She's pretty awesome. I mean, when you first think of her, you may just think of the skin messages and be like, oh, whatever, maybe she's a spy, maybe she can be like, send help and then use her skin. Cool, that's good. But check this out. Tattoo actually phased her hand into Cyclops' head once and told him that if she becomes solid, he would not survive to see the end of it. How awesome is that? But she sadly lost her powers during the events of M-Day, but if you ever ran into Christine again, she would probably surprise you with her new ability. When she was released from jail, she joined the New Warriors and was given her own Stiltman armor, becoming Longstrike. So bam! 2 in 1. Talk about underrated. Number 2, Banshee. The Screaming Banshee. Okay, he made his first appearance in X-Men issue 28. Sean Cassidy was born as the heir to the castle and estate of Cassidy Keep, Ireland. Now, Professor Xavier asked him to join the X-Men at the same time as Thunderbird, and they both stayed as members of the new X-Men. Now, he went on to train the new generation of X-Men and Generation X, but he sadly lost his life during Deadly Genesis when he was trying to stop Blackbird from crashing when it was taken over. So when you think of an X-Men who screams so loud he can hurt people, it's impressive on its own, sure, but his screams are actually stronger than we really think. His screams can actually break through an inch of steel. And with these wings that Professor X developed for him, he's able to harness this power and use his screams as energy to help him fly. So he can do so much more with his voice as well. He can tighten the sound waves around himself to make a sonic shield, and he can influence your subconscious by changing the tones and vibrations of his voice. He can literally change your mind. How awesome is that? What do you mean you want a divorce? And finally, number 1, we have my favorite on the list, Bailey Hoskins. Okay, I have to talk about this poor kid. Okay, strongest X-Men you wouldn't expect? Yeah, that is for sure Bailey Hoskins. The only appearance of this kid is in the 2016 miniseries X-Men, Worst X-Man Ever, which is a pretty cruel name. He was a student at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, and his power is pretty spectacular. He can self-detonate, he can make himself explode, and you would never expect it just by looking at him. I mean, come on. He reminds me of Hogarth from the Iron Giant. He's such a cute kid. The thing is, he can only use this fantastic ability once. And his last issue in the comics was X-Men Worst X-Man Ever, issue 5. Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Mimic. Calvin Rankin came into comics in X-Men 19. He was the son of a scientist, and when he was just a child, he knocked over a beaker filled with this experimental chemicals, okay? Now this red gas emerged and he inhaled it, so now he has this amazing ability where he can mimic anybody else's powers. They just have to be standing close by. Now the team at first is trying to take him down, but they're failing, of course, as he's just adapting to their every move. So while this ability does sound like one of the best, it kind of just depends on who's near you. I mean, he's not too powerful, but he is, if you're the one that's powerful that's near him. See what I mean? So if you're hanging out with Mimic, he may just seem pretty normal. That's because, well, shocker, you're just pretty normal. You can't fly, you can't shoot lasers out of your eyes. But if Cyclops came along, all of a sudden, this guy is totally different. You're still a boring human. Now he's another Cyclops. How unfair is that? And before we continue on with this list, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does wonders for our channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now let's get right back into these crazy mutants. Number 9, not another teen mutant. Okay, this next one is a one-off, okay? He doesn't have a name exactly, so we'll just refer to him as Teen Mutant from now on. Not a Teen Mutant Ninja Turtle, just a Teen Mutant. Well, you'll see, it's kind of crazy. At first, he looks like a regular kid. He's got posters on his wall, one of which is Wolverine with the caption, "Be different," right below it, but we'll talk about that a little later, because he may have taken that a little too literally. So he wakes up, he's ready for school, he's looking for breakfast. His mom is nowhere to be seen, only a pile of her clothes remain on the ground. So he doesn't call the police, but rather he just writes a note, sticks it, and then goes to school. If you ever wake up and there's just clothes left, call the police no matter what. That comes first. On the way to school, he sees there's just a collar lying on the sidewalk. Just a collar, no animal. Okay, odd. What's going on? Finally, he sees people. He's like, okay, great. I'm not going crazy. Whew, that was a close one. But I bet that he wished that that was the case after what's about to happen. So he has this neat ability where people just don't survive being close to him. They kind of explode. It's pretty gross. And he hears it from the guy in that poster himself. He hears it from Wolverine when he finds him ducking out in a cave. So what happened was when he hit puberty, he developed a specific mutation that radiates a series of toxins and acid-like poisons. So it wipes out any organic tissue in its way. It turns it into vapor. So the number of people that he ended up taking out that day was a whopping 265. And you thought he was just another blonde-haired teen heartthrob. Think again. Number 8, El Guapo. This next one, I don't think I would even notice this mutant if he was standing right in front of my very eyes. Meet Robbie Rodriguez. He was the stuntman for X-Statix the movie. Now he saved the team from Sharon Ginsburg. She attacked because she blamed X-Statix for the amputation of her wings. So in comes Robbie Rodriguez with his sentient skateboard to save the day. That's right, sentient skateboard, you heard me. He has no real powers himself, but he has this symbiotic skateboard that acts along with his mental commands, even subconscious thoughts sometimes. So the skateboard once beat him up for cheating on his girlfriend. So next time you see a dude at the skate park, just double check and see if it's Robbie Rodriguez, because you never know. Number 7, Anarchist. Tyke Alucard made his first appearance in X-Force issue 116. The same issue that had Zeitgeist origins as well, actually, which is in part 2. If you haven't already seen it, I talk about him. He's the guy who pukes acid. Gross. But we also meet Tyke Alucard in this. So he said he doesn't want to go and give away all his secrets, but he's got something going on with his sweat. It's like acid. He could secrete acid from the pores of his body, and if there's enough of it, say that when he's fighting bad guys, it becomes this form of energy that he's able to blast out. He would blast these acid blasts. Like, how insane is that? The guy makes acid brass knuckles. Brassed knuckles. He was a new addition to the team to replace Sluck, but they weren't a fan of him at first. They thought he was a risk, not a team player, high maintenance, and mentally unstable. Although he pulled through for the team at the end of the day. Number 6, Maggot. That's a fun name right off the bat. Maggot? Maggot, or I mean Japheth, first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 345. He was born with 5 siblings but never grew at the same rate as them. And on top of that, he had struggled with pains in his stomach. Sadly, those pains turned out to maybe be cancer, and he feared that he would run his family dry with medical bills. So at just age 12, he left the South African village and started to think of a dark solution to his problem. Super tragic. So he ended up in the Kalahari Desert and was found by Magneto, who figured out that these stomach issues were actually these 2 slug-like creatures that lived in the boy's body, and they acted as his digestive system. Years later, Maggot reached out to Magneto in hopes that he would help him with this gross situation. Now the slugs, named Eenie and Meanie, because that's what you do when you have slugs, you give them cute nicknames, they were these sentient techno-organic slugs that could devour anything. Doesn't matter what kind of matter you are, gone, devoured. They would do it fast too, not at the pace of normal slugs. And once lunchtime was finished, they would return back to Japheth's stomach, transferring the energy from what they just consumed, granting him super strength and durability. Also, he had a nice avatar tan to go along with these magnificent abilities. Number 5, Kid Omega. Now again, the word kid is used lightly in this list. You do not want to underestimate Quentin Quire, aka Kid Omega. He made his first appearance in X-Men issue 134. He's been described as one of the most powerful telepaths next to Jean Grey. So off the bat, you know you're in for a treat. He was one of Xavier's prized pupils. That is until, of course, he put together the Omega Gang, which was his gang that would handle humans after they've committed crimes against mutants. They would do it themselves, not in a poetic way, to say the least. They were like the super kid police. They even went to a tattoo shop and made it official. They got these Omega symbols tattooed over top of the X. Now his abilities are insane. He can manipulate your perception, judgment, wills, and common sense. He's able to track you down by listening to your thoughts, folks. Your thoughts, you can hear your thoughts. And even in this instance, if you were a telepath, you wouldn't see him coming because he would block out your powers to sneak up on you. One of the coolest things about Quentin is the psionic shotgun that he can create. It just looks cool. He just channels all this mental energy as this astral energy shotgun. And if that doesn't do the trick, the psionic rocket launcher should. Number 4, Kubark, aka Kid Gladiator, another kid. Kubark is the son of Emperor Gladiator. He was this young prince sent to Earth to train and discover more secrets about his powers. And the one place you go and do that is of course the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. Warbird was his bodyguard, and the reason that he was sent to Earth, this new kid on the block, was because he destroyed more than half of the Shi'ar royal city on Chandalar. Just for fun, you know? In Wolverine and the X-Men, he arrives and starts giving orders to other students, like to bring him snacks, the whole thing. And he wanted these students to call him their new Imperial Overlord. He's jam-packed with superpowers though. He can possess the ability to fly, and his eyes are pretty interesting, not just to look at. He has microscopic vision and can blast heat beams through those peepers. And with an incredible lung capacity, he can take in large amounts of air and blast it out, creating these hurricane-like winds. And if that doesn't work, he can use his breath to freeze you dead in your tracks. Number 3, Lifeguard, aka Heather Cameron. Lifeguard is such a cool character. Okay, let's talk about her. She's super unique. She made her first debut in Extreme X-Men issue 6, and judging by her name, yes, she of course started off as a lifeguard, and also as a surfer. Her mutant ability is that of a lifeguard. Literally, her powers allow her to manifest whatever is needed to save the life of somebody near her. If you're allergic to peanuts, bam, EpiPen, stab, we're good. She's like the super medic of the X-Men. She's awesome. After the events of M-Day, Heather was one of the lucky to retain her abilities. She's almost a combination of Darwin and Mystique. Now, I talked about Darwin in part 1 of this list, so if you want a little bit of catching up to do, you know where to find that. Number 2, Zeitgeist. Axel Clooney. He was seen in Deadpool 2, and he made his first comic book appearance in X-Force issue 116. His ability, let's just talk about it. He can spit acid, like a lot of acid. So much acid. It can eat through any substance, and I think what makes this character even more wild is when he himself discovered these powers for the first time. Oh boy, okay. He was at the beach hanging out, he met this lovely woman, they clicked, it was romantic, they were nice, they were kissing on the beach, and then all of a sudden, this happens. A lot of acid puke. A lot of puke, real nasty stuff. Ugh. But this guy is super powerful. Like, he can take on so many mutants. I mean, it's gross, but if only he didn't spew it out of his mouth, maybe he had fingers that could do the acid shooting, he would be less of a gag. Pun intended. And finally, coming in at number 1, Jubilee. Making her first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 244, Jubilee, aka Jubilation Lee, first discovered her mutant power of generating these dazzling sparkles from her hands. She was always seen as this little sister type character from the start, but she packs a powerful, pretty punch. She was discovered by Dazzler, Cyclops, Rogue, and Storm during a rescue at the mall, and when she followed the women back through a portal, she ended up at the X-Men's temporary base in the Australian outback. Jubilee and Wolverine ended up becoming a good pair, working missions together, and they were a fun duo. Now her powers grew to a whole new level when a vampire ended up infecting the area of Union Square. This happens in Curse of the Mutants, and Jubilee, being caught in the path of this infection, ended up becoming a vampire. It was a pretty big deal. Even before the vampire stuff, this is a highly underrated character to this day.
Number 10, Candy Southern. While Candy wasn't necessarily a member, she did help the X-Men and made her first appearance in X-Men issue 31 in the 60s. She was a longtime friend of Angel's and would later end up dating Warren. She also would team up with the X-Men to help find Warren when he went missing after learning of the fellow mutant team's existence, and Warren Worthington III's role as Hero Angel on the team. Candy would later break up with Warren and was killed by X-Factor enemy and former friend Cameron Hodge. Candace Southern wasn't a mutant and didn't have any powers, but she was skilled in business. I personally would love to see her somehow be resurrected and return to the comics in the new X-Corp series, working alongside the mutants as a human ally in business. That could be pretty cool. Number 9, Brew! Brew is one of my favorite of the more obscure X-Men members. He is a mutant of the Brood alien race. Brood are basically terrifying, violent, and love hurting others. Bru, however, is very different from the rest of his race, being a mutant. His mutant power is actually compassion or empathy. Unlike the rest of his species, he doesn't enjoy hurting others and, in fact, is more inclined to try and help others instead. Aww. Basically, he's a big brood sweetheart. Recently in the comics, Bru accidentally became the new brood king after consuming the king egg, and just in time too, as the mutant nation was in the midst of being overrun with invading brood at the time. Consuming the king egg allowed Bru to tap into and basically control the hive mind, becoming the leader of his species. And if you missed out on that whole fun adventure, you can check it out in the newest X-Men series. That's where that all went down, and it was pretty exciting to read. Bru initially appeared in the 2004 Astonishing X-Men series in issue 40, and would later team up with and be taken in by the X-Men, joining the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. He'd also get to have like a really fun day with Tony Stark, which is another fun Bru adventure. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder, if you love X-Men as much as I love X-Men, which is a lot, be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. And why not hit that subscribe as well while you're down there. Number 8. Vulcan. Vulcan is the retcon youngest brother of Alex and Scott Summers, aka Havoc and Cyclops. He was introduced during X-Men Deadly Genesis and was revealed to be one of the mutants who was part of Charles Xavier's original and formerly unknown rescue mission to save his team from Krakoa. Vulcan was the name he'd chosen for himself, though his name was originally Gabriel Summers. When Catherine Summers was kidnapped, she was pregnant with Gabriel, but he was taken from her womb and put in an incubation accelerator. Once fully grown, he was intended to be used as the Shi'ar Emperor's servant, but he escaped and was found and recruited by Moira McTaggart to join the X-Men. Vulcan's powers are similar to both his brothers and involve energy manipulation. He is considered an Omega level mutant and is capable of absorbing energy and dispelling it in the form of blasts. He can also use the energy to heal, fly, create constructs, manipulate objects, and as a form of sustenance. Number 7. Mimic. Mimic is a mutant, but one who gained his abilities after knocking over a beaker accidentally in his father's lab, which caused a chemical reaction that created a strange red gas which he then inhaled. His powers allow him to mimic the abilities and skills of other beings within a certain distance of him. Increased exposure to others' abilities seems to also grant him more permanent adaptations of those powers. It wasn't until more recently that it was actually confirmed that Mimic was in fact a mutant during House of X, as suspected since the 90s. Instead, we were led to believe initially that he was a human whose DNA was genetically altered. While not often appearing in the comics, Mimic, aka Calvin Rankin, is a character who has been around since the 60s, if you can believe it, and first appeared in X-Men issue 19, where fans were introduced to him and the question was posed of whether or not Mimic was a mutant or something far worse. Turns out he was a mutant. Mimic is a longtime villain of the X-Men who did for a time play the role of hero and has served on both the heroic X-Men team as well as Norman Osborn's dark X-Men team during the events of Dark Reign. But anyways, I feel like Norman Osborn's team should count, so if we do a part 5, expect me to get into some of that.
Number 6. Cypher. Douglas Ramsey came around with comics with New Mutants issue 13. Now he believes that language is power, and when we first meet him, he's a smart dude in a vest. He's got nice hair, he's talking about deciphering codes. We wouldn't expect too much from him. Maybe he's their guy in the chair. Other chair. Now Douglas is actually quite powerful. His ability allows him to communicate with any species. Written or spoken language doesn't make a difference. Doug's got your back, whatever language that is. He can also extend this ability to decipher codes and complex equations, leaving him a pretty powerful asset to any team. Number 5. Eyeboy. Trevor Hawkins, again, one of those mutants where you can probably guess his mutation just on his name alone. Eyeboy is, yes, covered in eyes. 57 of them, to be exact. He made his first appearance in Wolverine and the X-Men issue 19. He was one of the new mutants that manifested their power after the Avengers vs. X-Men war. Then he enrolled in the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. So Eyeboy, okay, big deal. You walk up, you poke all of his eyes out, problem solved. We've played Zelda before, we know how to defeat this guy. Wrong. He is more than meets the eyes. Trevor can of course see you coming, and though his eyes can't shoot laser beams, they do have a plethora of unique abilities. I'm talking microscopic vision, telescopic vision, X-ray vision, night vision, infrared, thermal, chemical detection, you name it, he can see it. All these eyes will see you in any sense. He can even pick up on your body language quite well. Number 4. Nature Girl. Lynn Lee made her debut in Wolverine and the X-Men Volume 2, Issue 1. And at first she seems like a regular student, just maybe with antlers. Okay. So Nature Girl can control and bond with animals, which sounds pretty peaceful if anything. Like if I could control animals, I'd spend all my time in the woods. I'd just take a flute and I'd have a great time. Maybe even pack a lunch. It'd be lovely. With her powers, she can of course do that, but also go further. She can connect to the natural world and control all of nature. Living beings, plants, weather, the very geology of the earth. Whatever the case is, she can control it. She can talk to plant lives as well. So if there's any plants that need some watering in your apartment, she'll let you know. And if Nature Girl needs to make a quick escape and there were no birds around to control, she herself can fly only for a limited time. Number 3, Gold Balls. Fabio Medina made his comic book debut in X-Men Volume 3, but it wasn't until issue 11 that we got to meet Gold Balls. His powers came to be after somebody tried to rob him, then all of a sudden he started to generate these spheres, these gold balls, out of every part of his body. And whenever these bouncy gold balls hit something, they would make a boink sound, which ought to be pretty annoying just as it is. So these gold balls were not made of gold, rather they were produced from infertile eggs. He's pretty outstanding as it is, but currently in the comics, he's referred to as Egg, which is more appropriate after he learned the true nature of his abilities. So Egg and these other members of the Five are tasked with resurrecting any mutants that have met their terrible fate. So eggs are a major key to this process. So he's not just all about, being gold and having balls and stuff. Number 2, Tag. Brian Cruz made his first appearance in New Mutants Volume 2, Issue 10. He was actually reborn thanks to that group of 5 that I just mentioned with gold balls. So Brian's powers are pretty amazing. I can see how one wouldn't expect him to be as powerful as he is. So he has what's called the pariah effect. So if he tags you, hence his name Tag, when he tags you, you become it. Then he uses this form of telepathy to make you emit this signal that causes everybody else to run away from you, just to leave your vicinity. Or they can run towards you, which is even scarier. And he can decide on that number of people affected as well. It could be one person chasing you, or it could be 200. Depends how many are near you. This effect stops after the victim reaches 100 feet. But still, that many people in that radius all running towards you, like what if it was Black Friday? It would be an absolute nightmare. Also, these people that are chasing you are fully aware of what's happening. They just can't control it. So if that's not a nightmare, I don't know what is. And finally, number 1, we have Summoner. Making his first appearance in X-Men Volume 5, Issue 2, the Summoner. The Summoner at first just looks like a mutant child. It's referring to its mother, so off the bat you assume, okay, young. He's the son of Bracken and Apocalypse's first horseman of war. He was born 300 years ago on Araco, the highest ranking out of all the other summoners. They were these wizards that can summon creatures of Araco. Now his grandmother was taken out by the dark god of Amenth, Annihilation. So that's when the Amenthi Daemons destroyed Araco's towers and then attacked and wiped out all those mutants. Now the Summoner is not just a pale child, he can summon a horde of elementals as well. Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Multiple Man. James Madrox. He made his first comic book appearance in Giant Size Fantastic Four, Issue 4, and right off the bat, he seems very soft-spoken, he seems very gentle. I mean, the Thing is yelling at him and he's literally like, "Why do you reject me? Why?" Like, he's so almost poetic in a way. And then when the Thing goes to clobber him, bam, there's multiple more men. Now, he wasn't used very much in the X-Men, but he spent most of his days with X-Factor. But this guy is underrated. His powers may seem kind of weak compared to somebody like Jean Grey, but these duplicates can each make a duplicate.
Let me try something. I'm Mr. Meeseeks. Look at me. I'm Mr. Meeseeks. I'm Mr. Meeseeks. Look at me. Hi.
At one point, this guy had 40 of him running around town. 40. Now, the duplicates think, they feel, and they act independently, but they're guided by the original James Madrox. In a way, they're guided. They kind of know what to do. Each of these duplicates manifests one aspect of James' personality, and the longer the time away, the more those traits become extreme. And if one of these duplicates passed away, he can sense that the general area where the body is, which is like the saddest radar ever. This guy could take over the world if he wanted. It would be like that scene from The Matrix, but with more monologues probably. And before we go on to this list of X-Men you probably wouldn't expect to be that powerful, guys, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, just right there, just give it a little tap, and it helps our studio out quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get back to the list. Lickety split. Number 9, Darwin. We saw this next mutant for a hot minute in X-Men First Class. He was played by Eddie Gathegi, who unfortunately didn't survive too long. See, he threw his life down on the line in order to protect his fellow X-Men. And this was still in the early days too. What a champ. He first showed up in the comics in 2005 with X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 2. Armando Munoz looked a lot different than we saw on screen as well. Since he was 4 years old, he was bald, his arms were super long, and his eyes were changing. He sure looks a little bit different than the young, handsome actor that we saw in the movie. His ability comes in handy a lot actually, more so in the X-Men movies. See, in the comics, he's practically immortal. His ability once allowed him to survive Hela's death touch. I mean, it's a little bit different than the last time we saw him, that's for sure. Number 8, Caliban. An albino mutant and former member of the Morlocks, Caliban made his first comic book appearance in Uncanny X-Men 148. So he has the ability to track down any mutant. He actually sacrifices himself in the movie Logan, where Stephen Merchant played him. He was also in X-Men Apocalypse for a bit too, played by a different actor. He was played by Tomas Lamarcus. He was originally an ally to the X-Men, but once he became a tracker for Apocalypse in X-Factor issue 24, titled The Fall of the Mutants. So he's pretty powerful, and he's done a lot of cool stuff too. He may seem like a gentle, lanky, pale man, but when Caliban is stressed out in the comics, he gains 2 additional powers: super strength and fear absorption. So if you put him in a corner, he'll be able to absorb the psionic energy in your fear and use it to power himself up even more. Number 7, Glob Herman, aka Robert Herman, although Glob is much more fun to say. He made his debut in New X-Men issue 117, and he grew up with a father who despised mutants, so already he's off to a pretty rocky start. So when Glob mutated, his father was just not on board, so his mother drove Glob out to Westchester and just left him for Professor X. Like you leave a baby at a fire station, it's just like, yep, here you go, your problem now. This mutation was interesting. So his skin was this transparent living wax, which he's able to maintain being on fire, which is pretty amazing off the bat. You can light him on fire and he's good to go. That's amazing. He runs with the New Mutants now, and although his name is silly and he's literally a glob, he can also possess powers of super strength and super speed, despite how he may look. So he can get hit by these massive bombs like it's nothing, then he can fight whoever launched that bomb with ease. The X-Men literally once used him as a heat shield once. They strapped Glob to the front of their ship, and it didn't seem pleasant for a man Glob, but he was good. He didn't die or anything. He had to rest for a bit.
Number 6, Darwin. Darwin has some of the coolest abilities, and yet he isn't often easily recognized as being one of the main members of the X-Men, even though he's been a part of the team for quite some time in the comics. For a long time, he was actually stuck bonded to Vulcan, as he was part of one of the first teams of X-Men Xavier and Moira ever had. I don't know if we called that team the X-Men, but they're basically like another squad of X-Men in my mind, so. He was part of the first team sent in to rescue the X-Men from Krakoa, though we wouldn't find out about that team in terms of comic book history till many years after the events of the X-Men's printed fight against the mutant Living Island. Darwin's powers allow him to evolve as needed to ensure his survival. This basically makes him almost immortal, as he can evolve to resolve almost any life-threatening situation. Recently, in the current X-Men run in issue number 5, this is why Darwin was chosen to be one of the team members to be sent into the vault after Serafina, as it wasn't known how long the team sent in would be locked within that place where time moves more quickly in comparison to Earth. I feel like they also just came out recently, but I haven't read that issue yet, so no spoilers. Number 5, Trance. Trance is another mutant who is affiliated with the X-Men and even tried out to become an X-Men in training under Emma Frost, following the events of House of M. She was one of the lucky few, or unlucky few, I guess depending on your perspective, to remain powered. Hope Abbott, or Trance, possesses the power to leave her physical body, becoming ghost-like in appearance on panel, but in reality, she's just astral projecting. In other words, she's not as powerful as some other mutants who are able to astral project as, part of their larger set of powers, generally being telepathic or telekinetic in origin. But hey, not everyone can astral project, so I still think this is pretty cool. I also like when people don't have like crazy awesome powerful things, and then you still have to see them like try to figure out, how do I use this in a way that's cool and good, so I can be on the same level. I think that's cooler to read, but that's just me. Number 4, Stacy X. Although Stacy X hasn't made a ton of appearances, she is a memorable character due to her, interesting and sensual abilities. Former abilities, I guess I should say. We don't really know if she has been returned to the status of a mutant, but we do know that she has joined the mutant nation of Krakoa now. So considering that when we last saw her, she was missing those abilities that she used to have in her former appearance, I assume that she has participated in the Crucible, was killed by the mutant formerly known as Apocalypse, and has been resurrected as her former self. But also, there are a lot of people in line to just be returned to us, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in line to participate in the Crucible to earn their powers back, so who knows? Who knows where she is in that long line. Also, Apocalypse is no longer on the island following the events of Ten of Swords, so there is that. I don't know who's running the Crucible now. Who is like the replacement Apocalypse. Stacy X was part of the X-Men for a brief period after being rescued by them from her place of work, which was attacked and destroyed by the Church of Humanity. Stacy X used her powers at her place of employment to help make clients who came through feel good and grant them sensations of pleasure. She can also use her pheromone powers in combat to make her opponents feel not so good, manipulating their bodily functions. She makes you feel sick. Blech. Number 3. Loa. Loa is one of the resurrected mutants to rejoin us on Krakoa, reborn again. While you may not know her as well as some of the others, she has a long and storied past with both the X-Men, her fellow mutants, good pals Rockslide and Match, and even with Namor. In fact, Namor was the one who came to save the day after she first discovered her powers. Loa's abilities allow her to pass through other matter and in so doing, destroy it on a molecular level. She discovered she had these powers when her dad was attacked by a shark while they were surfing together, and she passed through it, destroying it. Namor would later come to her and her father's rescue before the situation could escalate, and it was later revealed that her grandmother was actually an old friend of Namor's. Since then, she also gained the ability to breathe underwater after being exposed to the Atlantean amulet. The amulet also allows Loa's physiology to adapt so that she can survive in the depths of the ocean easily. Number 2. Match. You might know the Pyros, but do you know Match? Match is Ben Hamill, one of the mutants to appear in the new X-Men series, but making his first appearance in New Mutants. His powers are pyrokinesis, hence his name. It basically gives him control over fire, which he himself can generate, and also helps to make him immune to fire attacks and heat. Match is now not as hot on the radar, but was for a time the leader of the X-Men adjacent team, the Paragon Squad. He also participated in a competition for a place on Emma Frost's X-Men team and has attended both the Xavier Institute and the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. I'm not sure if it's of or for, because of feels weird to me, but I think it is right. It's of or for, it's one of those. Number 1. Lifeguard. Lifeguard is Heather Cameron, a mutant who, as a response to life-threatening danger, gains the skills and powers necessary to save those lives around her. This power, or powers, not only works for her in regards to saving others, but also is a reactive power that applies to saving her own life, meaning she can get out of pretty much almost any kind of dangerous situation that she puts herself in. Before lifeguard was her codename, it was actually her profession, as she worked as a lifeguard in Australia where she lived with her brother Davis. Eventually, it was also implied in the comics that she has unknown Shi'ar heritage. We've seen her resurface in Dawn of X, popping up in Krakoa at the Green Lagoon bar, but it would also be super cool to see her play more of a prominent role at some point in the comics, as her powers are pretty neat and definitely super useful. But maybe too powerful? Maybe that's why we haven't seen her as much. Like Hope.
Kicking off the list at number 10. M. Monet St. Croix made her first appearance in Generation X issue 1 as Penance, and by the time issue 40 rolled around, she was introduced as Monet. She was the second child of Ambassador Cartier St. Croix, who was a wealthy former president of numerous corporations. Now, although she had an older brother and 2 young twin sisters, her father still favored her. Now, her brother Marius had mutant abilities, and when they manifested, he became evil. Sadly, he actually took out his mother and was kicked out of the family, and then he asked Monet to join him, traveling through other dimensions, gaining power. She was like, nope, I'm good, thanks. So she rejected him, and Marius trapped her in this form of a mute creature with diamond-hard red skin. And he fed on her powers. What a not nice guy. It's awful. So Claudia and Nicole, her sisters, the twins, they joined forces. Like, literally. They merged into a new version of Monet. And it was all pretty much the same. Personality, appearance, and powers. M is a telepathic genius, and of course super strength and super speed sure does help her get the job done. Before we continue on with this list, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be great. It does help our channel quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Let's go right back into this list. I don't want to waste any more time. Number 9, Frenzy. Okay, Joanna Cargill. She made her first debut in X Factor issue 4. Now, she accidentally punched her father so hard that her hand went through his chestal plate. which is just a great way to find out you have powers. Now, her father was in no means a good person at all, but still, finding out you're a mutant in that way is pretty rough. That's pretty traumatizing for a young kid. So she became known as Frenzy, and she joined the Allegiance of Evil. Now, after the Acolytes disbanded, Joanna became ambassador for Genosha and stood by Magneto until she was captured by the US government in order to learn more about Magneto, but she didn't talk. She was a tough one. She didn't talk until Jean Grey entered and freed her, giving her the option to join the X-Men the easy way or the hard way. Jean used the hard way, and then Frenzy's entire attitude was changed. Her personality was like campy, it was awkward, not nearly as confident as before, but her powers were still there. She did help the X-Men find Magneto's base. She was a team member, even if it was forced and campy. So after Magneto's defeat, her mind control was released and she rejoined the Acolytes and then left the X-Mansion. Super speed, super strength, super stamina, super everything, you name it, she's got it. Her body has been described as being hard as steel, making the She-Hulk put up quite a fight. Number 8, armor. Hisako Ichiki made her first appearance in Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, Issue 4. Now, she grew up in Japan before joining the Xavier Institute. She formed a close relationship with Wing and Blindfold once she joined Kitty Pryde's Paladin Squad. Now, her new close friends were being attacked one day by Ord of Breakworld, so Armor used her unique mutant abilities to take care of him with a mighty punch. She can create the psionic exoskeleton suit of armor, hence the name Armor. It's fueled by the energy of Hisako's ancestors. In the Ultimate Universe, her abilities create quite the spectacle as well. They appear in the shape of these massive animals, these great beasts, even dragons at some point. As if these abilities weren't surprising and fantastic enough, she also received combat training from Wolverine and tactic training from Cyclops. So she's kind of a big deal. Number 7, Vulcan. He named himself after the Roman god of fire, but Vulcan's real identity was that of Gabriel Summers. He was born after Cyclops and Havoc. Well, not really. He wasn't really born. He was actually surgically removed from his mother's body and placed in an incubator accelerator, then aged to be at his prime, and then sent to Earth to work for Dak and Shikari. One of those normal childhoods, you know? So he escaped and he was found by Moira McTaggart with no memories of who he is or where he came from. Poor kid. So he asked for Charles' help, and then all Kid Vulcan wanted to do was learn about his mutant abilities. Sounds like the perfect student. Like, come on, you're doing all the right things. Charles needed help from him and other newcomers to find the remaining X-Men. So Charles put him in this danger room as a training exercise to get them sharp in a short amount of real time. So it felt like months of training, but in fact it's only a few hours. And then Vulcan and this new team were sent to Krakoa to rescue the original X-Men. But Vulcan revealed to Scott that Xavier sacrificed his own brother to save him.
Number 6, Thunderbird. While we haven't seen Neil Shara in a while, he was listed as a member of the X-Men in the Ten of Swords handbook, and while it's since been revealed that the X-Men were originally made defunct after Krakoa came to be during Dawn of X, they saw their return during the denouement of the Ten of Swords event in their own series, X-Men, which had been going on since Dawn of X in the comics, comically, despite the team no longer being technically recognized by the Quiet Council. So it's really weird. It's like we had an X-Men series, but like no one acknowledged that the X-Men team existed. Anyways, they're back now, sort of. Thunderbird could also appear again at some point as part of X Corporation, as Neil has also been a part of that team in the past. While he's not the most recognizable mutant to use the codename Thunderbird, Neil is still one of those mutants. His abilities allow him to convert ambient heat into solar plasma, turning his entire body into this type of plasma, which gives him a variety of abilities and powers, including emitting focused plasma beams and flight. Number 5, Cypher. You know about Cypher, but do you know about Cypher? With an I, not with a Y, just to be clear. Cypher is Elisa Tager and has powers similar to mutant Kitty Pryde. That is, she can phase, and even float or fly while in her phased state. She was part of the Gene School for Higher Learning and was initially discovered by mutant Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Zorn. Cypher also can turn herself invisible both visually and psychically. Well, almost completely invisible psychically. Almost. Immensely powerful telepaths such as Jean Grey have still been shown as being able to sense her. Although Cypher has only made a few appearances here and there in the comics, she still managed to make her way onto the young X-Men team and has even reappeared on Krakoa. Number 4, Ink. Ink is another member of the X-Men who technically isn't a mutant. It was believed initially that his mutant ability was to gain powers from his tattoos. However, it was later revealed that it was Eric Gitter, aka Ink's tattoo artist, who was the mutant and who basically imbued Eric with these powers using his own mutant ability. Ink's tattoo artist was Leon Nunez, a mutant with no codename really, simply being known by his name or known as the tattoo artist. Ink would be recruited as one of the young X-Men, initially believing he was working for Cyclops, Cyclops, but later learning he was in fact working for a disguised Donald Pierce. Inc. fought alongside his fellow X-Men, but would leave the team for a time later on after discovering that he wasn't truly a mutant, when he found out where his powers really came from. When his fellow teammates needed his help, however, he would return armed with more tattoos from his artist. The Ten of Swords handbook listed him as an active member of the X-Men, so, you know, he's there, he could be back again, I don't know. I feel like I haven't seen Inc. in a while, but he's out there. Number 3. Slipstream. On my previous list I talked about the mutant known as Lifeguard, but now it's time to focus on her brother, who is also a mutant, don't you know, Davis Cameron, aka Slipstream. While his sister Heather worked as an actual lifeguard in Australia, Davis himself was a surfer. His powers weren't activated until later in his life and were actually awoken by Sage after his sister went missing, and it was revealed his latent mutant abilities could be used to help find and then rescue her. Slipstream's abilities allow him to create quantum portals, which can transport him and any passengers he takes along with him across great distances. However, it should be noted it requires a lot of concentration for him to bring others along with him. He can also track previous teleportations, allowing him to use these warp wave abilities to find his way to the destination and location of teleporters that he's tracking. Which I think is a pretty useful ability, tracking teleporters, because they're tricky. Number 2. Spider-Girl. Well, not naturally born, but kinda made in a lab, Spider-Girl made a single appearance in Avenging Spider-Man issue 16. She had similar powers to Spider-Man, but was made of a combination of spider and mutant DNA by the Jackal, using materials found in Mr. Sinister's lab. Wow, the Jackal in Mr. Sinister's lab just sounds like such a dangerous thing. As such, she also had the additional powers to shapeshift into a giant spider with 5 human eyes. While in this shape, she also had the power to spit purple mucus and even fire optic blasts from her eyes. Makes you think there might be some Summers DNA mixed in there, which honestly, if we're talking about Mr. Sinister's lab, I wouldn't be surprised. She ended up rampaging across the city of New York after the Jackal released her as part of a test. Fortunately, she was apprehended by Superior Spider-Man and the X-Men, who explained that she seemed to be a mutant and ended up taking her in after defeating her. We never really heard anything about her after that. Spider-Girl was created by Christopher Yost and Paco Medina. Who knows, maybe we'll see her again, I don't know. Number 1. Forget-Me-Not. Despite the fact that Forget-Me-Not is someone you definitely forget, you may have heard us talk about him on the channel before, because his powers are just so interesting. But for those who haven't heard of him or have simply forgotten him, let's give you a little refresher course. Forget-Me-Not is an X-Men member whose mutant power is that no one can ever remember him. This makes it easier for him to basically infiltrate places, but it makes it harder for him to ever connect with anyone, make a friend, or even have his teammates remember that he's actually on the team. This is why Forget-Me-Not is also usually left off of the official rosters for the team, and why you might never really see his name mentioned there, ever. Forget-Me-Not's psychic powers that enable him to go unnoticed and remain forgotten were actually so strong that even Professor Xavier struggled to remember him, and as it was revealed in X-Men Legacy issue 300, had to place within his mind a psychic hourly reminder just so he wouldn't forget permanently about Forget-Me-Not's existence. Number 10. Skin. I love me some Gen X mutants, which is why you know I need to talk about Skin on this list. Skin is a mutant whose mutation is basically just a bunch of extra skin. In the comics, it actually took a while for Angelo to be able to embrace his abilities, as he basically resented his powers and being a mutant. However, as time went on, he came to accept them and even became quite good at utilizing his extra skin and using it as a cool power. He could even use it to change the appearance of his shape and face, becoming somewhat of a shapeshifter. While Angelo Espinosa can stretch his skin, it should be noted that his skeleton does not change, making his power kind of a weird and unique one. Skin is also known for having literally thick skin that is more durable than most, as well as more elastic. Number 9. Husk. Paige Guthrie might not be one of the main heroes that you think of when you think X-Men, but for a time she was actually a close-knit part of that team, and even had a controversial romantic relationship with fellow X-Men member Angel, who, even though we don't talk about him as much, is one of the original members, so yeah. I even thought of like putting him on this list just because we never talk about him, but I was like, wow, that would be mad disrespect to Angel, so I couldn't do it. I can't lie, I'm actually really excited for the X-Corp series just because I am ready for Angel's return return to the spotlight. Paige's powers are fairly unique in that she can shed her skin to reveal a new layer of skin made out of a different material beneath it. This new outer layer of skin can be made of anything that she wants it to be, such as wood, rubber, or even diamonds. Diamond skin is so cool. Just taking a page of Emma Frost's book there. Love it. Number 8. Hellion. So yeah, the early 2000s saw us go through a mutant boom. A boom that likely led to the events of House of M, which was probably used from a practical standpoint to kind of remove a good number of mutants because it was just getting, well, it was getting so out of hand with keeping track of all of these different mutants. We had so many. Too many, maybe. Just kidding. You can never have too many mutants. Hellion was a part of this boom, and he took inspiration for his codename from his mentor Emma Frost's fallen group of mutants, the Hellions. Julian Keller is likely a mutant associated with the X-Men that we don't talk about as often because, well, he's kind of a jerk, and he's not as much of a lovable jerk as someone like Sunspot, so yeah. Julian possesses a unique version of telekinesis in that his powers are far more advanced and allow him to take control on a seemingly molecular level of different objects. They also come with a super cool color as well. Everything he does is like green with his powers. Unfortunately, when emotions get in the way of these powers, this level of telekinesis results in him sometimes combusting objects by accident or simply in anger. Hellion has made a return in Krakoa and has appeared in a few comics, but hasn't become a main member of any of the prominent teams featured there just yet. I personally think it'd be cool to see Hellion on the Hellions, but I don't know if he's like messed up enough to be on the Hellions. Number 7. Mercury. Mercury is another mutant to come from the bunch that Hellion was a part of. Julian was actually her first friend that she made when she arrived at the Xavier Institute. Mercury's, or Cecily Kincaid's, parents had sent their daughter there after her powers first manifested, ashamed that she was a mutant. Eventually, they would actually end up disowning her after they themselves were pulled into a mutant conflict. Mercury's powers allow her to turn her skin into liquid metal, which she can then control, reform, and use to shapeshift with. This form is of course made up of non-toxic mercury, which is where she gets her codename from. Mercury was also one of the few mutants to keep her powers following the events of M-Day. In fact, I have quite a few of those on my list. Not all of them, but a few of them. Number 6. Caliban. Caliban is believed to have gotten his name from that of the character from William Shakespeare's Tempest, often referred to as having a monstrous appearance. Poor Caliban, and also poor Caliban. Caliban is one of the members of the Morlocks, but he would later on join the X-Force and even go on to team up with the X-Men later on, despite him and the Morlocks being their frequent enemies in the past. Caliban's mutant powers increase the reaction of his fight or flight response, allowing him to manifest super strength as well as a sort of absorption and then later emission of fear. Basically, if you're feeling afraid in the moment, he can kind of like take that in and then put it back at you, or if he's feeling afraid. It's pretty useful. You're gonna be afraid, you know what I mean? These powers only appear when in this mode, however, when Caliban experiences that increase in adrenaline. He is also able to sense the presence of mutants within a nearby radius, and that's a mutant power that he has even when he's not in that fight or flight mode. Number 5. Blindfold. Blindfold is Ruth Aldine and is a possible descendant of Destiny. She was born without eyes entirely. Her mutant powers allow her to manipulate astral energy, tap into the astral plane, and grant her specific telepathic abilities, including precognition and clairvoyance. She also has the ability to manipulate chaos factors and alter events in order to achieve a desired result, and maintains a reality warp resistance. Pretty useful. She also has some telekinetic abilities as well. Much of her power was lost to her, and she was in rough shape when she was admitted to the Xavier Institute. She had lost half her power and had her mind shattered by her brother. Blindfold had a really rough home life, and her brother Luca ended up coming home one day filled with hate for his sister and prepared to kill her with a chainsaw. When her mother stepped in to defend her, her mother was instead murdered by Luca, who blamed young Ruth's freakishness for his own actions. Luca ended up getting the death penalty for this crime, but when he died, it seemed as though his own mutant abilities manifested, causing him to shift into an astral or ghost-like form and attack Ruth. Blindfold has a close connection to Legion and would later end up in a relationship with the son of Charles Xavier. Yay! I don't know why I'm celebrating that, but I just think it's kind of a cute romance, I guess. Number 4. Triage. Triage was one of the mutants to appear after the dispersion of the Phoenix Force. Christopher Muse discovered his powers when a friend of his fell and hit her head while they were out dancing. It seemed as though she was dead until Christopher's touch seemed to heal and revive her, bringing her back to life. Eventually, he was apprehended by the police because of his miraculous healing ability, but would later be freed and recruited by the X-Men. He was one of the mutants who was captured and later killed by one using the X-gene cure after he refused to use his healing powers to help them. Triage seems to have had eternal youth and immortality as a result of his powers, in addition to being able to heal others and even reanimate the dead. Fortunately, since his death, he is one of the mutants that we have seen return by the Five on Krakoa, with him being spotted in the comics at Krakoan hotspot, the Green Lagoon. Number 3. Darkwind. X-Men teammates really do come in all shapes and sizes. Coming to us from Asgard, we have Danny Moonstar's mighty steed, Brightwind. Remember when Danny joined the Valkyrie after she lost her powers following M-Day? Yeah, it was during that time that she met and bonded with Brightwind. After leaving Asgard and returning to Earth, Brightwind came with her, but instead became known as Darkwind on Earth. So that's why I said Darkwind at the beginning of this point. By extension, he became a member of the X-Men and New Mutants along with Danny. Cute. Number 2. Ariel. Ariel is an alien from the planet known as the Coconut Grove. Her mutant power is persuasion, but due to her alien physiology, she can also teleport. Ariel herself is also related to another Ariel who visited Earth and inspired the character of the same name from William Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. There's a lot of Tempest references in my list today. Ariel, the one we're focusing on with this point, not her ancestor, also ended up on Earth after being sent there on a mission to collect samples from the mutants of Earth for her people to study. They themselves had reached an evolutionary standstill as such and were curious about the Earth mutants and their evolutionary process. It was during her time on Earth that she would meet up with and join the Fallen Angels, and later on in San Francisco would end up meeting the X-Men team and joining them for a time. Number 1. Sunpyre. You know Sunfire, but do you know Sunpyre? Sunpyre was Shiro Yoshida's younger sister, Leu. She also had powers and an attitude similar to her brothers, and first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 392 in 2001. For those unfamiliar with Sunfire's or Sunpyre's abilities, both siblings possess the mutant ability of solar flare, which allows them to absorb solar radiation and convert it into superheated plasma. Using this ability, they could both cover their body in flame as they became like a flying, human-shaped sun. Sunpyre can use her power to emit plasma blasts and give off intense solar heat. Leu is one of the mutants who answered a psychic call to help defeat Magneto and save Professor X. After helping out the X-Men in that adventure, she'd later appear again as a member of the X-Corps. It is believed she died in action when the other members of X-Corps turned on her because Mastermind, Martinique Wingard, working in league with Mystique, was controlling them.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Blob. Fred Dukes, aka Blob, made his comic book debut back in Uncanny X-Men issue 3, and he got his powers when he was just a young man. He often looked at himself as this extra super strong freak of nature at this point, just this giant strong man whose temper often got the best of him. The X-Men met him at a carnival where he was using his might and muscle just to get by. And then when Scott Summers approached Blob and asked if he'd heard about the X-Men, he responds with, "Oh, those jerky juveniles in the corny costumes? Yeah, I've heard of those guys." First of all, rude. So he goes back and Charles has him tested. He has him pulling these massive chains so hard that he breaks these chains like King Kong. And then he starts to make a break for it, launching away any X-Men member in his path. So now he's gone, but now he knows everybody's real identity because he was there for a bit and then he's like, yeah, you know what? I'm out of here. So Charles had to track him down and then erase his memory from his brain. I had to start with Blob because he was so close to being a member. So much potential, and then he ended up picking the wrong team 3 issues later. But we had him for a bit. And before we continue on with this list, if you guys haven't already, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up because it helps our channel out so much. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to our list. Number 9, Vulcan. He named himself after the Roman god of fire, but Vulcan's real identity was that of Gabriel Summers. He was born after Cyclops and Havoc. Well, not really born, he was surgically removed from his mother's body and placed in an incubator accelerator, aged to be at his prime, and then sent back to Earth to work for Divan Shikari. He then escaped and was found by Moira McTaggart with no memories of who he is or where he came from. He was impressing Charles quite a bit and all he wanted to do was learn his mutant abilities. Sounds like the dream student. So Charles needed help from him and other newcomers to find the remaining X-Men after most of them had been depowered from the Scarlet Witch. So Charles put him in this danger room purely made of Charles' thoughts as a training exercise to get them sharp in a short amount of time. So inside it feels like months of training, training, but in actuality it's only a few hours. Then Vulcan and his new team were sent to Krakoa to rescue the original X-Men. But Vulcan revealed to Scott that Xavier sacrificed his own brother to save him. And then Kid Vulcan's true origins are shown, and in the next issue of Deadly Genesis, he's unleashed. Number 8, Frenzy. Joanna Cargill made her first comic book debut in X Factor issue 4, when she accidentally punched her father so hard that her hand went through his chest. Now her father was by no means a good person at all, but I mean doesn't mean he deserved to go out like that. Plus finding out you're a mutant at that time in that way must have been pretty traumatizing. She became known as Frenzy and she joined the Allegiance of Evil. After the Acolytes disbanded, Joanna became an ambassador for Genosha and stood by Magneto until she was captured by the US government in order to learn more about Magneto. But she didn't talk. She kept her mouth shut until Jean Grey entered and freed her, giving her the option to join the X-Men the easy way or the hard way. Jean used the hard way, and then Frenzy's entire attitude was changed, just like that. Her brain was different. Now her personality was campy, it was awkward, and not nearly as confident as before. But she did help the X-Men find Magneto's base. She was a team member, even if it was forced and awkward. After Magneto's defeat, her mind control was released and she rejoined the Acolytes and left the X-Mansion. Again, a little brief, but it still counts. Number 7, Caliban. An albino mutant and a former member of the Morlocks, Caliban made his first comic book appearance in Uncanny X-Men 148. He has the ability to track down any mutant, and he actually sacrifices himself in Logan, where he was played by the hilarious Stephen Merchant. Great film. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's on Disney Plus now, rated R. So good. He was originally an ally to the X-Men, so I'm gonna count him as a hero who switched over to the dark side. Because once he became a tracker for Apocalypse in X Factor issue 24, titled The Fall of Mutants. So Apocalypse gave him extra strength and renamed him Hellhound, taking the place of the Horseman Death.
Number 6, Warbird. Warbird is a pretty unique character, having been born as a member of the Shi'ar Empire, but not knowing her parents. Her mother was an alien who was taken captive and who was killed by giving birth to Avedara, who would grow up to be Warbird. Her mother's reproductive organs basically were not compatible with the Shi'ar, and so she did not survive the pregnancy. Avedara would grow up to become a Shi'ar warrior and join the prestigious Warbirds, whose job it was to guard the royal family. Warbird is not a mutant, but would work alongside the X-Men team and cross paths with them while being tasked with guarding over Kid Gladiator. She first appeared in Wolverine and the X-Men in issue number 1. Number 5, Spiral. Spiral has been an enemy of the X-Men, but would also become a member of Storm and Psylocke's X-Force team. She was a human known as Rita Hayward, who would end up in the Mojoverse and become part of a time paradox, having been attacked by her future mutated self, Spiral. Originally, she was a stunt woman who ended up falling in love with Longshot during his time on Earth and returned with him to the Mojoverse. When his plan to defeat Mojo failed, Rita was captured and was modified by Mojo to have 6 arms, one of which was completely cybernetic. Spiral herself is part cyborg, part human mutate as a result of the modifications performed on her. She was also the one responsible, acting as an agent of Mojo, for giving Psylocke her cybernetic eyes. True facts. Number 4, Shark Girl. Seriously, Wolverine and the X-Men has such a fun group of characters in it. If you haven't checked it out, you need to check it out. Ira dos Santos is one of that group. She first appeared in issue 20 of the series and has also been referred to as Were-Shark before, which is pretty fitting, as both names would imply she is basically part shark, part human, and that's also her mutation. Shark Girl is one of the mutants who appeared following the dispersion of the Phoenix Force. When her powers first manifested, both the Brotherhood and the X-Men attempted to recruit her to their causes. She refused both offers and was later kidnapped by Mystique, who attempted to then recruit her using force, basically. Fortunately, she was saved by Angel and would eventually agree to attend the Jean Grey School of Higher Learning. Shark Girl can transform into a full shark and can also transform into a part shark, part human, basically like a land shark. While in these forms, she can survive either underwater or on land and has enhanced strength, stamina, and speed. Number 3, Adam X. We are going back to the crazy Summers family tree for this one. Adam X is the half-brother of Cyclops, Havoc, and Vulcan. His mother is Catherine Summers, but his father was the emperor of the Shi'ar Empire, Emperor Deken Naramani. Adam X first came on the scene in the 90s, and to hear his story, you'd easily be able to peg him as a 90s character. Trust. He was abducted when he was just a baby from the genetic lab in which he was created by Jonath, who became became his adoptive father and raised him. Growing up, his mutant powers would manifest, which allowed him to basically set others' blood on fire, burning them from the inside out, which already sounds like such a 90s power in my mind. He can also ignite his own blood, which is very painful, but grants him a speed boost. Adam would then learn that he was a hybrid being, part Shi'ar, part mutant. Number 2. Petra. Petra has the ability to manipulate rocks and rock formations. She can cause earthquakes and even use her powers to create diamonds. In fights, she can bind her opponents or completely destroy them by having the earth move to swallow them, and she can transform rocks into different kinds of weapons and wield them against her opponents, sending them hurtling towards them. Petra was recruited by Moira McTaggart after being apprehended by the police. Her family died in a rock slide when she was young, which to this day Petra actually wonders if she caused. Following that, she was moved into the foster care system, but after her adoptive father attempted to assault her, she used her powers to escape him and became a runaway. She discovered her ability to turn coal into diamonds, and she would later exchange these diamonds for a place to sleep, but eventually this kind of drew suspicion, and she was later tracked down and then taken in by the police. Fortunately, Moira arranged for her to be released, and then of course offered her a place as part of her team. Number 1. Sway. I love Sway. Her powers are just so cool, and her origin is so tragic. I feel so bad for Sway, but I'm also like, these powers are awesome. I love the way that they're phrased. I love the way that they're used. It's neat. Sway's powers manifested when she was just a teenager. While visiting New York City in preparation for college, Suzanne's parents and herself ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were gunned down during an attack that was basically part of a gang war. While Suzanne's parents were killed in the attack, she miraculously survived, due to the manifestation of her powers, which allowed her to manipulate the flow of time. She had instinctively stopped the bullets that would have hit her in midair, but she didn't have the experience or the understanding yet required to save her parents. Sway's powers allow her to control and manipulate time in her nearby vicinity. She can also rewind the temporal memory of a location, allowing her to basically review past events. It was using her powers that she was able to track down her parents' killers and report them to the police, helping them to apprehend those criminals. In revealing her abilities to the officers, she was basically put in contact with Moira McTaggart, and then of course ended up joining up with the X-Men. Number 10. Binary. Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel ended up in a fight with Rogue that left her zapped of her powers and her memories. During the tussle, Carol was thrown from the Golden Gate Bridge, but fortunately Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, showed up to save the day. Unfortunately, when Carol came to, it was apparent that her memories had been wiped. Spider-Woman reached out to the X-Men for help, and for a time, Carol Danvers became part of that team. Professor X was able to help restore Carol's memories, but her emotional attachments to those memories would remain lost. It was during her time adventuring with the X-Men that she would become binary after a space adventure with the team saw her cross paths with the Brood, who exposed her to an evolutionary ray that tapped into her latent potential. True story. Number 9. Longshot. Longshot is a paradoxal hero. He ended up joining the X-Men after being sent to Earth by Mojo so that he would forget all that had passed before that, like the part where he almost defeated Mojo. Without his memories, Longshot showed up in the X-Men's danger room and would end up befriending them and serving as an ally and a teammate. He is the father of Shatterstar, who he had with X-Men member Dazzler, but was also made from Shatterstar's DNA, creating a paradox and a strange time loop when it comes to his origins and his creation. Longshot got his name during his time on Earth, which was given to him because of his fighting style. Longshot always taking the long shot, the less likely, more desperate path of success in fights. Longshot, however, can do this as while not a mutant but being engineered from the DNA of one. He possesses probability altering powers which grant him a bit of luck. He also has enhanced speed, strength, agility, and endurance, which he often uses to fight with using throwing knives. Longshot is also known for his super handsome powers that cause many people he meets to instantly fall for him. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder, if you love X-Men truly as much as I love X-Men, then be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here at the channel, so thank you if you already did that. Number 8. Surge. Surge grew up homeless on the streets of New York after running away from her home when her powers first manifested. Far away apparently, as she was born initially in Tokyo, and her parents still live there. Her powers cause her to absorb electricity from all nearby sources at all times, without the ability to stop, even zapping electricity out of the air. She can then discharge this energy through blasts or by using it to give herself bursts of super speed. Noriko Ishida's powers are hard for her to control and are considered volatile, which is why Beast created gauntlets for her that helped her to control them when she was later welcomed into the Xavier Institute, after initially being turned away. Number 7. Danger. Who could forget one of the most important members of the X-Men? The Danger Room. The Danger Room was a room used to help train the various members of the X-Men team, but was later revealed to be mutated technology which had evolved to become a sentient AI. So yeah, an AI mutant. Danger revealed their intelligence to Xavier when, after an upgrade and relocation facilitated by Mutant Forge, they asked, "Where am I?" Charles chose to ignore this and hide the room's sentience from the X-Men so that he could continue to use it to train his team. Pretty selfish, Professor. Danger is extremely powerful, and parallels between her and Ultron are often drawn on in the comics when it comes to all the destruction that she could be capable of. She possesses superhuman strength, stamina, and durability, as well as enhanced reflexes and agility. She can command and control other technology and use her own mass to recreate other materials and or rooms. She can also create other technology and even technological bodies if she happens to have mechanical devices, scrap, or equipment to work with.
Number 6. Gazer. Making his first debut in X-Men Volume 2, Issue 169, Gazer met the X-Men when a Golgotha invasion was threatening Earth. He was alone on a NASA space station, and due to his mutant abilities, he was the only person that could withstand high levels of radiation. So when these creatures approached Earth, he told Emma Frost, and then the X-Men joined him in space on his observation platform. Again, he wasn't knighted with a sword and deemed an official X-Men or anything like that, no. But he's a mutant who works in space to keep our planet safe, and he calls Emma Frost. So call him what you want, but this man's a hero. He's a bored, lonely hero up in space. He's definitely an X-Men. I'll say he's an X-Men. But then, after the events of M-Day, things changed, and so did his morals. He lost his abilities, so now he was experiencing horrible radiation sickness, so he decided to literally jump ship, wanting to go out there instead of passing away alone in here. Fair, I mean, sad, but also makes a lick of sense. It's kind of like George Clooney in Gravity, just floating out in space.
Houston, I've lost visual, Dr. Stone.
But while he was drifting in space like a hero, Apocalypse came on by to save his day, thus becoming the Horseman War. Number 5. Sunfire. He made his first debut in X-Men issue 64. Shiro Yashida's mother passed away of radiation poisoning when he was still young, and Shiro was raised by his uncle Tomo to hate the West and return to Japan to their imperial days. So he trained for years and attacked America when the X-Men pulled up to put a stop to it. So Sunfire ended up taking out his uncle and returning to Japan, but then he was sent to destroy an American cargo ship, but then Namor turned him for good. Now he was Japan's protector. When most of the X-Men were captured by Krakoa, Sunfire was recruited by Charles to help. He was named as one of the mythical 12, representing the power of nature alongside Storm and Iceman. So far, so good. But then during a battle with Deathstrike later on, he was presumed dead after an altercation, and the X-Men couldn't find his body. But you know who did? Apocalypse. Yep. He was turning him into the Horseman Famine, and he kind of had control over it, kind of. See, he wanted to stay and see if he could help out Gazer, who I had previously mentioned up there, but they were sadly both turned by the end of the day. At least he tried. Number 4. Forge. Forge is a mutant and a tribal shaman who made his debut in Uncanny X-Men 184. He's known for creating these amazing inventions, and before he worked for the X-Men, he was fighting in the Vietnam War, where he would use dark magic to save himself. He rejected the life of a shaman in order to serve. He was able to create advanced cybernetic prosthetics to replace his missing limbs during all these battles. And then after the events of M-Day, Forge searched the multiverse to try and find other mutants. Then there was an alternate world of mutants at war with a group of artificial mutants that were created by Forge. So he was bad. He's a bad guy in another world. Brilliant mind, but it can get him into a little bit of trouble in some of these stories, especially the Ultimate Universe, where he literally sided with Magneto. And during this, he actually created a power amplifier for Magneto to use in order to flip the Earth's magnetic poles and take out every living being on the planet. So thanks, Forge. Really cool. You couldn't have made like an iPhone 14. cool. That's good too. Number 3, Storm. Aurora Monroe made her first debut in Giant Size X-Men issue 1, and she's one of the more popular members of the X-Men, being portrayed by Halle Berry and Alexandra Shipp. She was recruited by Charles and she joined the team to save other original members from Krakoa. She was appointed leader after several years of work, and in X-Men Apocalypse, we see her recruited as a Horseman. But by the end of the movie, she betrays him and joins the X-Men because she's not a fan of how he treats her idol, Mystique. It's probably the only time we'll see Storm evil, at least in this live action run. But it was still pretty entertaining. It was nice to see a younger version of Storm, and then of course be influenced by Apocalypse. It was kind of cool. I could do with more bad Storm. I mean, you know, just for a little bit. Number 2, Lord Xavier. We can't forget this one, okay? He's also known as the Witch King, and you can see him in Volume 2, Issue 9 of Extreme X-Men. So the Witch King ruled over Genosha and sports a look that is very menacing, maybe Power Rangers. It's pretty badass, but also kind of Power Rangers. It's right in the middle. He has an army of orcs and beasts on top of his already spectacular abilities. And in this issue, we also see a few upgrades to the Professor, like concussive energy blast for starters. And in the opening of the story, we see him effortlessly take down invaders with machines, so it doesn't matter how you roll up to this fight, Lord Xavier, Witch King of Genosha, will take you down with his armies of orcs and beasts. Probably one of the cooler versions. Finally, number 1, Deadpool. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. It's such a blast to read, and I had to include it in here because it's so good. It's so Deadpool. The issue was released in August 2012, and just the front cover, you know what you're getting into. So what's the story here? What are we getting into? What happened to Wade? Well, his mouth wasn't sewn shut, and he didn't have swords for hands. Nothing like that this time. No. The X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity. The doctor, Psycho Man, was brainwashing Wade in hopes to shut down all of his inner voices, which worked, but now all these voices were replaced with voices that were encouraging him to kill everybody in the Marvel Universe. So it went from bad to worse, and of course, Wade's the one to do it. Right off the bat, this series draws you in. I mean, it opens with the Fantastic Four facing off with Wade. Reed gets left all rubbery and left for dead and lifeless. It's really gruesome, but also really fun. Not for the faint of heart, but definitely fun, and obviously super gory.